The day we moved into the old house on Hemlock Lane, I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. The house was a relic, a two-story Victorian with peeling paint and windows that looked like vacant eyes. My parents saw potential. I saw shadows. My little brother Leo saw an adventure. He was only 7, and his world was a playground of endless possibilities. My sister Maya, a teenager glued to her phone, was just annoyed by the lack of cell service. It was Leo who found the door, tucked away at the end of the upstairs hallway. Behind a heavy tapestry depicting a faded hunting scene was a small, dark wood door. It was unlike any other in the house. There was no knob, only a keyhole filled with rust and shadow. Leo was instantly captivated. He'd press his ear against the wood, claiming he could hear whispers. I told him it was just the house settling, the wind whistling through the cracks. But a part of me wasn't so sure. The first few weeks were a blur of unpacking boxes and painting walls. The house slowly started to feel like a home, but the little door remained a stubborn, locked secret. Leo's fascination grew into an obsession. He spent hours by the door, tracing its edges with his small fingers. He'd leave his toys there, little plastic soldiers standing guard. Started talking to it, his voice a soft murmur that sent shivers down my spine. One evening, I found him sitting cross-legged in front of the door, his face pale in the dim hallway light. He was humming a tune, a simple, discordant melody I'd never heard before. He told me the room was lonely, said someone inside was waiting for a friend. That night, the scratching started. It was faint at first, like a mouse scrabbling inside the wall. But it came from the door. Slow, deliberate scrape, scrape, scrape against the wood. My parents dismissed it as old pipes. Maya didn't even look up from her screen, but I knew, and Leo knew. Things escalated quickly after that. Toys would go missing from Leo's room and reappear by the locked door, often broken. A cold spot developed in the hallway, a pocket of air so chilling it would steal your breath. Leo started having nightmares. He'd wake up screaming, talking about a tall, shadowy man with long fingers who wanted to play. He said the man was trapped in the room and wanted Leo to let him out. My parents grew concerned, taking him to a child psychologist who diagnosed him with adjustment anxiety. They told us to be patient, but we didn't have time for patience. One afternoon, I was home alone with Leo. He was unusually quiet. Found him in the hallway holding an old rusty key. My blood ran cold. He said he found it under a loose floorboard in his closet. He said the man in the room had told him where to look. Before I could stop him, he pushed the key into the lock. It turned with a deafening, grinding click that echoed through the silent house. The door creaked open just a sliver. A wave of musty, cloying air washed over us, smelling of dust and decay and something else. Something sickly sweet, like rotting flowers. Leo pushed the door open wider. The room was small and bare, coated in a thick layer of dust. There were no windows. The only thing inside was a small wooden rocking chair in the center, gently swaying back and forth as if someone had just gotten up. In the far corner, a dark stain spread across the floorboards like spilled ink. Leo stepped inside, a strange, blank look on his face. He walked towards the rocking chair, his little hand outstretched. "He wants to play," he whispered. As his fingers brushed against the chair, the door slammed shut behind him, plunging the room into absolute darkness. I screamed, fumbling for the doorknob, but there wasn't one on this side either. I pounded on the wood, yelling his name. From inside, I heard a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. It wasn't Leo. It was a low, guttural chuckle, a sound that was ancient and full of malice. Then Leo started to scream. It was a raw, terrified sound, filled with a pain I couldn't comprehend. I threw my shoulder against the door again and again, my panic rising with every one of his cries. Suddenly, Maya was there, her face white with fear. She'd heard the slam, the screams. Together, we rammed the door. The old wood splintered, groaned, and finally gave way. He stumbled into the room. It was empty. The rocking chair was still. The dark stain on the floor seemed larger, deeper. But Leo was gone. The room was silent. The police came. They searched the house, the grounds, the entire neighborhood. They found nothing. No signs of a break-in, no trace of my brother. To them, it was just a strange, empty room. They sealed it off, a yellow tape Xing across the broken door. My parents were hollowed out by grief. The house, once a place of new beginnings, became a tomb of sorrow. We moved out a month later, leaving most of our belongings behind. couldn't stand to be in that house, in the presence of its suffocating silence. My parents never spoke of the room again. It was easier to believe Leo had wandered off a tragic accident than to face the impossible truth. Maya and I knew better. We knew he hadn't wandered off. He was taken. Years have passed. I'm an adult now, but the memory of that day is branded into my mind. I still have nightmares about the shadow with the long fingers, about Leo's screams, about the empty rocking chair. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I think I can hear a faint scratching sound, and a whisper carried on the wind, a child's voice humming a discordant, lonely tune. A few weeks ago, I saw an online listing. The old house on Hemlock Lane is for sale again. The description calls it a charming fixer-upper with unique historical character. It mentions a quaint, cozy bonus room on the second floor, perfect for a child's playroom. A cold dread filled me as I read those words. Someone new will move in. Some new family will see the potential, the adventure, and some new curious child will find the little door at the end of the hall, and the thing inside, it's still there. It's patient, and it's waiting for a new friend to play with. The old house stood on a hill overlooking the town, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. From the moment Alex, Sarah, and their 7-year-old daughter Lily moved in, something felt wrong. It wasn't just the creaks and groans of an old structure settling. It was a feeling, a pervasive sense of being watched. The house had countless windows, like 100 vacant eyes, and Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were all fixed on his family. Their first week was a blur of unpacking boxes and forced optimism. Alex would find Sarah staring out a window, her reflection pale and distant. When he'd ask what was wrong, she'd just shake her head, a flicker of confusion in her eyes, and say she'd lost her train of thought. Little Lily started talking to an imaginary friend she called Mr. Shades, who lived in the walls and watched her from the dark corners of her room. She said his eyes glowed. The disturbances began subtly. Tools would vanish from Alex's workshop, only to reappear in the most illogical places: a hammer in the freezer, saw under Lily's bed. Doors would slam shut in empty hallways, and faint whispers seemed to ride the drafts that snaked through the house. Alex tried to rationalize it, all wiring the wind, the stress of moving, but the feeling of being observed only intensified. He'd catch movement in his peripheral vision, a flicker of a shadow darting just out of sight. One evening, while working late in his study, he looked up at the window. For a terrifying second, he saw a figure standing on the lawn, a tall, spindly silhouette with eyes that glowed with a faint, malevolent light. He blinked, and it was gone. His heart hammered against his ribs. He ran outside, the cold night air biting his skin, but the lawn was empty. He told himself it was a trick of the light, a reflection. He had to. The house began to play with their minds. Alex would hear Sarah calling his name, her voice filled with panic. But when he'd find her, she'd be calmly reading a book, denying she'd said a thing. Sarah swore she saw Alex watching her from doorways, his face contorted in a silent, hateful glare. But he'd be on the other side of the house. They started arguing, accusations laced with fear and paranoia. The house was feeding on their distrust, turning them against each other. Lily's conversations with Mr. Shades grew more frequent and more disturbing. One afternoon, Sarah found her daughter standing in front of the large picture window in the living room, whispering to her own reflection. But the reflection wasn't mirroring her, it was smiling, a wide, unnatural grin that didn't reach its dark, empty eyes. Sarah screamed and snatched Lily away, but when she looked back, the reflection was normal again. The house was getting stronger, its presence more tangible. The shadows in the corners of rooms seemed to deepen and coalesce. Sometimes, at the edge of his vision, Alex would see it the same tall figure from the lawn, its form clearer now. A being woven from darkness and held together by 2 points of piercing golden light. It never moved, it only watched. It was the house. The house was alive, and it was hungry. The breaking point came during a violent thunderstorm. The power went out, plunging them into absolute darkness. The whispers grew bolder, slithering into our dreams and twisting our waking thoughts. One evening, determined to find answers, I sat down at my laptop. I just wanted to find some history, anything about this place. I typed the address into the search bar, my fingers trembling slightly. For a moment, old property records started to load. black and white text flickering on the screen. But then the screen glitched, flashed violently, and instead of deeds and dates, I saw faces. Gaunt, terrified faces, their eyes wide with a horror I was beginning to know all too well. They were the house's previous tenants, trapped in a digital gallery of despair. The images cycled faster and faster: a man, a woman, a child, their silent screams echoing from the screen before it went black, showing only my own reflection, pale and horrified. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. The house was watching, and it wouldn't let its secrets go that easily. A few days later, the tension between Sarah and me was a tangible thing, a cold fog filling every room. I found her in Lily's bedroom, staring at a piece of paper in her hand. Her face was ashen. When she looked at me, her eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and accusation. She held up the drawing. It was one of Lily's, a crude crayon sketch of our family. There I was, there Sarah was, and there was Lily standing between us. But our eyes. Lily had scribbled them out with a black crayon, leaving empty, soulless voids. Beside us stood a tall, shadowy figure, all sharp angles and darkness, and underneath, Lily had written a name. Mr. Shades. She talks to him, Alex, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. She says he lives in the walls and promises to play with her forever. Before I could comfort her, a faint sound drifted from the vents. It sounded like Sarah's voice, whispering my name, but the words that followed were venomous, twisted lies about leaving me, about how she and Lily would be better off. I looked at the real Sarah, her face etched with worry, and for a terrifying second, I couldn't tell which one was real. The house was no longer just in the walls. It was inside our heads, tearing us apart from within. That was when the first rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. The storm was coming, and so was Mr. Shades. Lightning flashes illuminated the house in stark, terrifying snapshots. In one flash, Alex saw the shadowy figure standing at the top of the stairs. In the next, it was at the bottom. It wasn't moving. It was simply appearing, closer and closer. He grabbed Sarah and Lily, his voice a choked whisper, telling them they had to leave. Now, they scrambled for the front door, their hands fumbling in the dark for the knob.
Alex.
Finally found it, turned it, and pulled. It wouldn't budge. He threw his shoulder against the solid oak again and again, but it was like pushing against a mountain. Panic set in, cold and sharp. They were locked in. Every window, every door was sealed shut. The house wouldn't let them go. They huddled together in the living room, the storm raging outside, and the silent terror growing within. Lily began to cry, pointing a trembling finger toward the hallway. "He's coming, Daddy. Mr. Shades is coming." Alex followed her gaze. The darkness in the hall was different, a thick, inky black that seemed to absorb all light. And from within it, two golden eyes ignited, burning with an ancient, predatory intelligence. The figure emerged slowly, unfolding itself from the shadows. It was impossibly tall, its limbs long and thin like the branches of a dead tree. It didn't walk. It flowed across the floor, a silent, creeping dread. It didn't have a face, just the void of shadow and those two hypnotic, glowing eyes. The eyes of the house. Alex stood frozen, shielding his family, his mind screaming a command his body couldn't obey. The temperature in the room plummeted. Frost began to spiderweb across the window panes, not from the outside cold, but spreading from the inside. The patterns weren't random, were forming pictures, horrifying pictures. They showed a family, a man, a woman, a small child, their faces twisted in silent screams trapped behind the glass. As Alex stared in horror, he saw new figures beginning to form in the frost. A man who looked like him, a woman who looked like Sarah, a little girl who looked like Lily. The shadowy entity drifted closer, its glowing eyes fixing on Lily. It raised a long, spindly arm, a finger of pure shadow extending towards her. Sarah let out a strangled sob. Alex finally broke free from his paralysis, a primal scream tearing from his throat as he lunged forward. But he was moving through molasses. The house was slowing him down, holding him back. He never reached it. The figure touched Lily's forehead. Her eyes went wide, the color draining from them, replaced by the same vacant golden glow as the creature's. She turned her head slowly, chilling, unnatural smile spreading across her face as she looked at her parents. She was no longer there, Lily. Sarah's scream was cut short as the entity turned its attention to her, then to Alex. The last thing Alex felt was an encroaching, absolute cold. The last thing he saw was his own horrified reflection in the house's many windows, his face joining the gallery of silent, screaming souls trapped within the glass. The storm passed. The sun rose on a quiet house on a hill. From the outside, nothing looked amiss. But if you were to stand on the lawn and look up at the windows, you might catch a glimpse of movement. The faint, ghostly images of a family of three, their faces pressed against the glass, their eyes wide with an eternal, silent horror. They had become part of the house. Another story for it to tell, another family for it to watch forever. We should have turned back the second we saw the old asylum. It stood on the hill like a rotted tooth, silhouetted against a bruised twilight sky. There were 4 of us, me, Liam, Chloe, and Banal, chasing the cheap thrill of a dare. And we'd heard the stories, of course. Local legends about Ward 7 and the whispers that never left. We laughed them off. The air inside was thick and cold, heavy with the smell of dust and decay. Our flashlights cut sharp cones through the darkness, revealing peeling paint, overturned gurneys, and the faint, unsettling scent of antiseptic that somehow clung to the air after decades. We were filming everything, our nervous laughter echoing a little too loudly in the cavernous hallways. The plan was simple. Get to Ward 7, stay for an hour, and leave with bragging rights. We found it at the end of a long, dark corridor. The door was heavy steel with a small barred window. Faded sign read Ward 7. Acute care. Ben, ever the showman, pushed it open. I groaned in protest, the sound scraping down my spine. The ward was a single long room lined with smaller cell-like chambers. The moonlight struggled through grimy barred windows, casting long, distorted shadows. It was unnervingly quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's pressing in on you from all sides. We fanned out, our flashlight beams dancing across the walls. I focused my camera on the rusted bed frames and the strange, looping scratches that covered the walls inside the cells. They looked like words, but they were too frantic to read. That's when we first heard it. It's a whisper, faint and dry, like dead leaves skittering across concrete. It was so soft I thought I'd imagined it. I looked at Chloe. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the far end of the ward. She had heard it too. Liam and Ben hadn't noticed, still making jokes and trying to spook each other. Did you hear that? Chloe mouthed to me. I just nodded, a knot tightening in my stomach. Then it came again, a little clearer this time. Soft, sibilant sound, like someone trying to say hush. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. This time, Ben and Liam stopped dead. The joking mood evaporated, replaced by a tense, prickling silence. What was that? Ben whispered, his voice tight. Liam pointed his flashlight down the hall. It's probably just the wind, but there was no wind. The air was dead still. We huddled together, our backs to each other, a small island of light in a sea of black. The whispering started to get more frequent. It wasn't one voice, it was many. A chorus of faint, overlapping murmurs. We were just on the edge of hearing, impossible to make out. But the intent felt clear. It was cold and mocking. I kept my camera rolling, panning slowly across the dark cells. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. My feet felt rooted to the spot. Part of me, the stupid thrill-seeking part, needed to know what was happening. Chloe grabbed my arm. It's getting closer, she breathed. She was right. The whispers were no longer coming from the far end of the ward. They were moving around us, circling us in the dark. I could feel a strange pressure in my ears, the way you do when you change altitude too quickly. Then a new sound cut through the murmuring, a giggle. It was a child's giggle, but it was wrong. It was thin and reedy, like a recording played on a dying music box. It echoed from one of the cells to our left, a cell that was pitch black. Ben, trying to reclaim his bravado, stepped toward it. "Hello?" he called out, his voice shaking. "Someone in there?" The giggling stopped. For a moment, there was only the sound of our own ragged breathing. Then, from the darkness of that cell, a single word slithered out, perfectly clear and articulate. Get it? Wasn't a child's voice. It was deep and guttural, a sound that seemed to scrape its way out of a raw throat. A wave of pure primal fear washed over me. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't the wind. It didn't need to be told twice. We scrambled, tripping over each other in a blind panic. I almost dropped the camera. The chorus of whispers erupted around us, louder now, angrier. It felt like they were clawing at our backs as we fled down the corridor. The single guttural voice followed us, repeating that one word over and over. Get, get, get. We burst out of the heavy ward door and didn't stop running. We sprinted through the maze of hallways, our flashlight beams bouncing wildly, creating a dizzying strobe of decay and shadow. The whispers seemed to follow us, chasing us through the asylum, their mocking tones echoing in our ears. We didn't stop until we were outside, gasping in the cool night air, our hearts hammering against our ribs. We piled into the car and peeled out of there, leaving the asylum and its shadows behind. No one spoke a word on the ride back. There was nothing to say. We had gone looking for a ghost story and had stumbled into something far worse. Later that night, I sat alone in my room and finally got the courage to watch the footage. My hands were shaking. I fast-forwarded through the initial shaky shots of us joking around. Stopping at the part where we entered Ward 7, the audio was the worst part. When I put on headphones and turned the volume all the way up, I could hear them. The whispers. They were there from the moment we stepped into the ward, hidden beneath our own voices. And they weren't just random murmurs. They were words. Our names. They were whispering our names, over and over again. Liam, Chloe, Ben, my name. But the most chilling part was right before we heard the giggle. For a split second, as my camera panned past the dark cell, the flashlight beam caught something. It wasn't a person, it was just a shape, tall and impossibly thin, huddled in the corner. It was only on screen for a few frames, a pale, long-limbed figure that seemed to unfold itself from the shadows. And just as it moved out of the light, the camera's microphone picked up one more sound, a sound I hadn't heard in the asylum. It wasn't a whisper, it was a low, wet, clicking sound, like a tongue clicking against the roof of a mouth. A dry, hungry sound. I deleted the footage, tried to forget what I saw, what I heard, but I can't. Sometimes when I'm alone in a quiet room, I think I can still hear it. That faint, dry whisper just on the edge of hearing. Sometimes in the dark I see a tall, thin shadow unfolding in the corner of my eye. We went looking for a thrill, but we woke something up. Or maybe it was just waiting. Waiting for someone to come listen.
Leo's room was his kingdom. By day, sunlight streamed through the window, painting the walls in warm, golden hues. His shelves were packed with comic books. Action figures stood frozen in heroic poses, and a sprawling train set occupied a significant corner of the floor. This room was his sanctuary, his fortress of solitude, the place where his imagination could run wild and free. He was the king, and every toy, every book, was a loyal subject. But when the sun went down, everything changed. Night transformed his kingdom into a prison. The familiar shapes of his toys morphed into monstrous silhouettes in the encroaching darkness. The friendly shadows that danced on his walls during the day became grotesque figures, lurking just at the edge of his vision. Leo would lie in his bed, clutching his blanket like a shield, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The world outside his thin fortress of sheets and pillows was no longer his own. It belonged to something else. It began subtly, with a sound so faint he almost missed it. A soft scratching, like a mouse scrabbling at the floorboards. But this wasn't the sound of a mouse. It was slower, more deliberate. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It came from directly beneath his bed. He'd freeze, straining his ears in the silence. His breath caught in his throat. The sound would stop as suddenly as it started, leaving Leo alone with the thunderous pounding of his own heart. He tried to convince himself it was just the house settling, the old wood groaning under the weight of the night. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. Then came the whispers. They were like the rustle of dry leaves, a sibilant hiss that slithered into his ears from the darkness under the bed. At first, they were just sounds indecipherable and faint, but soon they began to take shape. Words. His name, Liu ... The sound was stretched out, thin and reedy, like a recording played at the wrong speed. It was a voice that had never known sunlight. A voice born in the cold, damp dark. He would pull the covers over his head, pressing his hands over his ears, but the whisper seemed to come from inside his own mind. It was a chilling, intimate violation of his sanctuary. His parents, of course, didn't believe him. "It's just your imagination, sweetie," his mom would say, tucking him in and kissing his forehead. "There are no monsters under your bed." His dad would get on his hands and knees, peering into the dusty abyss beneath the mattress. "See? Nothing here but dust bunnies and a lost sock," he'd announce with a cheerful grin. They would leave a nightlight on, a small, glowing sentinel against the darkness. But the little light only made the shadows deeper, more defined. It didn't scare away the thing under his bed. It only gave it form. The terror wasn't confined to the night anymore. It started to bleed into his daylight hours. He'd be at school, trying to focus on his math problems, and he'd hear a faint scratching sound from under his desk. His blood would run cold. He'd be playing in the yard, and a sudden whisper on the wind would sound just like his name. He stopped playing in his room. The train set gathered dust. The action figures remained in their static poses, their plastic eyes seeming to watch him with a silent, knowing pity. His once vibrant kingdom was now a haunted land he only entered when he had no other choice. One night, the scratching and whispering were joined by a new horror. A soft thump. He opened his eyes, just a crack, peering out from under his blanket. One of his favorite action figures, a caped superhero, had fallen from its shelf. He knew he'd placed it securely, far from the edge. A few minutes later, another thump. A small toy car rolled slowly from the corner, stopping right in the middle of the room. It was as if an unseen hand was playing with his toys, arranging them, moving them. He watched, frozen with a fear so profound it felt like ice in his veins, as his train chugged a few inches along its track, making a soft metallic click in the dead silence. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. Dark circles formed under his eyes. He was jumpy, irritable. His grades slipped. His parents grew worried, taking him to doctors who spoke in hushed tones about night terrors and anxiety. But Leo knew it wasn't a dream. The terror was real. It lived under his bed, and it was getting bolder. The night it all came to a head was a stormy one. Rain lashed against the window pane, and thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the old house. The scratching beneath him was frantic, urgent. The whispering was louder, more insistent. "Leo, I know you're awake. I can hear your heart." A strange sort of calm washed over him. It wasn't bravery, but resignation. He couldn't live like this anymore. The constant fear was hollowing him out, turning him into a ghost in his own life. He had to see. He had to know what was tormenting him. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Leo sat up. The floorboards were cold against his bare feet as he slipped out of bed. The room was almost pitch black, save for the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the scene in stark, terrifying detail. He stood over the source of his dread, his own bed. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He got down on his hands and knees, his breath catching in his throat. He hesitated for a long moment. The whisper, a constant hiss from the void below. Then, he forced himself to look. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, the world under his bed was revealed. What he saw would be burned into his memory forever. Two pale, luminous orbs, like dull moons, stared back at him. They weren't eyes in the conventional sense. They were just lights, cold and devoid of any emotion except a chilling, ancient hunger. The face, if you could call it that, was a pale, indistinct smear in the darkness. But the hands. He saw the hands clearly. They were long and thin, like the twigs of a dead tree, with fingers that ended in sharp, black points. They were slowly, deliberately, scraping against the wooden floor. The world went silent. The storm, the rain, the pounding of his own heart, it all faded away. There was only the creature and its glowing eyes, pinning him in place. Then, the whispering voice filled the silence. No longer a faint hiss, but a clear, close, and horrifyingly real sound. It came from right in front of him. "You looked." As the words echoed in the small space, one of the twig-like hands began to uncurl. The long fingers stretched out, reaching for him across the dusty floor. It moved with an unnatural slowness, a horrifying grace. It was going to touch him. A primal scream tore from Leo's throat. He scrambled backward, crab walking away, his eyes locked on the reaching hand. He stumbled to his feet and fled, bursting out of his room and not stopping until he slammed into his parents' bedroom door. his screams finally turning into incoherent sobs. He never slept in that room again. His parents, seeing the sheer, unadulterated terror in their son's eyes, finally understood. They moved his bed, his toys, everything, into the guest room the very next day. They sold the house a few months later. Years passed. Leo grew up. He moved away, went to college, got a job, built a life. But the memory of those pale, glowing eyes and that whispering voice never left him. It's a cold spot in his soul that never warms. He's taken precautions. The bed in his apartment now is a modern one, a solid block with drawers underneath, a frame that sits flat on the floor. There is no under the bed. There is no space for anything to hide. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the city outside is asleep, he'll hear a faint scratching sound. He tells himself it's the neighbor upstairs, the pipes, the building settling. But then, just at the edge of his hearing, he'll catch a whisper, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, and he'll lie awake, perfectly still, until the sun comes up, because he knows, with a certainty that chills him to the bone, that some voids can't be filled, and some monsters don't need a space under the bed to know exactly where you are. They just wait.
My grandmother always said, "Never trust a mirror you find." I used to think it was just one of her old superstitions, a quirky saying from a woman who saw omens in everything. But after what happened to my sister Clara, I know it was a warning. It started a few months ago. Clara, a budding artist, was always scouring antique shops for unique props for her still life paintings. One rainy Saturday, she stumbled upon a small, dusty shop tucked away in a part of town we rarely visited. In the back, half hidden under a pile of old fabrics, was an ornate, silver-framed mirror. It was beautiful, with intricate carvings of vines and strange, distorted faces peeking through the leaves. The glass was cloudy, but something about it called to her. She bought it for a steal and brought it home, beaming with pride. She hung it in her bedroom, right across from her bed. The first few days were normal. She'd sketch in front of it, using its antique frame as a backdrop. But then, things started to get weird. It began with small things. She'd mentioned that she saw a flicker of movement in the reflection, just at the edge of her vision. A shadow that wasn't there. We brushed it off as tricks of the light, the old glass playing with her eyes. Then came the whispers. Late at night, when the house was silent, Clara would hear faint murmuring coming from her room. It sounded like a hushed conversation, but she could never make out the words. I told her she was probably just tired, her mind playing tricks on her after long hours of painting, but a part of me felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I remembered Grandma's words. One night, I was woken by a scream. I bolted out of my bed and ran to Clara's room. I found her sitting up in bed, drenched in a cold sweat, staring at the mirror. Her eyes were wide with terror. "It smiled," she whispered, her voice trembling. I looked in the mirror, and my reflection, it smiled at me. But I wasn't smiling. I tried to comfort her, telling her it was just a nightmare. But when I looked at the mirror, I felt an inexplicable chill. The air around it felt colder, heavier. The carved faces in the frame seemed to mock us. From that night on, Clara's health deteriorated. She became withdrawn and paranoid. Dark circles formed under her eyes, and she barely ate or slept. She refused to go into her room alone. She claimed her reflection was changing. Sometimes it would be older, its face etched with wrinkles she didn't have. Other times its eyes would be hollow and dark. The most terrifying part was the smile, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched from ear to ear, full of teeth that weren't hers. Her art changed too. Her vibrant canvases were replaced with dark, disturbing images. She painted the reflection over and over. A twisted version of herself with a grotesque smile, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. Her paintings were terrifyingly real, capturing the pure horror she was experiencing. She was trying to show us what she saw, what was haunting her. We tried everything. Took her to doctors, therapists, anyone who would listen. They diagnosed her with stress, anxiety, even psychosis. They prescribed medication, but nothing helped. The entity in the mirror was real to her, and it was slowly consuming her. One afternoon, I went to check on her and found her room empty. Her window was wide open, and her easel was her final painting. It was a self-portrait, but the face was split in two. One half was Clara, her expression one of pure terror. The other half was the smiling reflection, its eyes glowing with triumph. And in the background, the silver-framed mirror stood empty, was gone. The police launched a search, but they found no trace of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. A week later, desperate for answers, I went back to the antique shop where she bought the mirror. The old man behind the counter looked at me with sad, knowing eyes when I showed him a picture of it. He told me a story, a local legend about a smile snatcher, a creature that lived in mirrors, feeding on the joy and life of its victims. It would mimic them, twist their reflections, and drive them to madness until it could finally pull them into its world, leaving an empty frame behind. He said the mirror had been in his family for generations, always kept hidden. He never meant to sell it. He put it in the back, hoping it would be forgotten forever. He warned me that the creature was patient. Once it had a taste of a family, it would often return for more. Driven by a mix of fear and a desperate need to find my sister, I went back to her room. I stood before the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, all I saw was my own frightened face, and then it happened. In the reflection, a figure began to form behind me. It was Clara, but it wasn't her. Her skin was pale, her eyes were hollow pits, and on her face was that same hideous smile. She raised a hand and pressed it against the glass from the inside. Her smiling reflection, a perfect, horrifying match to the painting she had left behind. I wanted to run, to scream, to shatter the glass. But I was frozen, trapped by the gaze of the thing that wore my sister's face. Then my own reflection began to change. The corners of my mouth started to twitch, pulling upwards into an unnatural smile. It wasn't my smile. It was the mirror's. I was looking at myself, but I was no longer in control. I could feel a cold presence seeping into me, a chilling joy that wasn't my own. I finally understood. The mirror didn't just show you a monster, it turned you into one. It was a gateway, and it was inviting me in. I stumbled back, breaking eye contact, and fled the room, slamming the door shut. I grabbed a heavy blanket and a hammer. With my eyes closed, I charged back into the room and threw the blanket over the mirror. I swung the hammer again and again, not stopping until I heard the satisfying sound of shattering glass. When I finally dared to pull the blanket away, the mirror was a web of cracks. The ornate frame was splintered, but in every shard of glass I could see it. A tiny, smiling face. Hundreds of them, all grinning at me. I gathered every single piece, wrapped them in cloth, and buried them deep in the woods, miles from my home. It's been a year since Clara disappeared. I've moved out of that house, but I can't escape the feeling that I'm being watched. Every time I pass a reflective surface or window, a puddle, a polished countertop see a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. A flash of a wide, unnerving smile. I avoid mirrors now. I've covered every one in my new apartment. I know it's still out there, waiting. The smile snatcher. It took my sister, and I know someday it will come back for me. My grandmother was right. Never, ever trust a mirror you find. Because you never know what's smiling back from the other side.
The old house stood on a hill overlooking the town, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. My family bought it for a steal, charmed by its Victorian quirks and the promise of a fresh start. We were so naive. My parents saw a dream home. I saw a place where shadows clung to the corners a little too long, where the silence was heavy, like a held breath. It started subtly, a misplaced book, a door left ajar that I swore I had closed. I blamed it on the house settling, my own forgetfulness. But then came the whispers. They were faint at first, like the rustle of dry leaves carried on the wind, slithering from the vents and the gaps beneath the doors. They never formed words, just hushed, sibilant sounds that made the hair on my arms stand up. My younger sister, Lily, was the first to give them a voice. One evening, she was in her room, playing with her dolls. I heard her chattering away, as kids do. But then I heard a second voice, a low guttural murmur responding to her. I burst into the room. Lily was alone, her dolls arranged in a perfect, unsettling circle. "Who were you talking to, sweetie?" I asked, my heart thumping against my ribs. She just smiled and pointed to the wall. "The new friend," she said. "He's just shy." That night, I couldn't sleep. The whispers were louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from inside my own walls, a chorus of secretive murmurs. I pressed my ear against the floral wallpaper, and I heard it clearly, a dry, rasping sound, like something scratching, trying to get out. I recoiled, a cold dread washing over me. We weren't alone in this house. Things escalated quickly. My dad's tools would vanish from his workshop in the basement, only to reappear in the attic, arranged in bizarre, ritualistic patterns. My mom's prized rose bushes in the garden began to wither and die, their petals turning a sickly, blackish brown overnight, despite her best efforts. The house felt like it was actively working against us, pushing us out with a quiet, malicious intent. One afternoon, I was home alone, trying to do my homework. The whispers started again, but this time, they were different. They were coalescing, forming a single, distinct word. My name. Alex. Alex. It rasped from just behind me. I spun around, nothing. The room was empty, but the air was thick, and a foul, earthy smell, like a freshly dug grave, filled my nostrils. I fled the house, not stopping until I reached the end of the street, gasping for breath. I tried to tell my parents, but they brushed it off. It's an old house, Alex, my dad would say. They make noises. My mom thought I was just having trouble adjusting. But Lily knew. She started drawing pictures of her new friend. They were terrifying scribbles of a tall, impossibly thin figure with long, spindly limbs and a face that was just a blur of black ink. She would leave these drawings all over the house, like offerings. The entity grew bolder. We'd see it from the corner of our eyes. A fleeting, lanky shadow darting down the hallway. A gaunt silhouette, standing in a darkened doorway for just a second before melting away. Its presence was a physical weight, a constant pressure that made it hard to breathe, that filled our home with an atmosphere of pure dread. The whispers were no longer just whispers. They were guttural threats, promises of what it would do if we didn't leave. The basement was the heart of its power. None of us dared to go down there anymore. The door, no matter how many times we locked it, would always be found slightly ajar, a dark invitation to the cold, damp space below. One night, a series of loud bangs erupted from the basement, shaking the entire house. My dad, finally fed up, grabbed a heavy flashlight and went to investigate. My mom and I waited at the top of the stairs, huddled together with Lily. He was down there for what felt like an eternity. We heard a muffled shout, then a sickening, wet thud, followed by a dead, terrifying silence. My mom screamed his name when he finally emerged. He was pale, his eyes wide with a horror I had never seen before. He refused to say what he saw, but he started packing our bags that very night. He just kept repeating, "We have to leave. Now." As we scrambled to get our things, the house came alive. Every light flickered and died. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, a cacophony of rage that seemed to shake the very foundations. The air grew so cold that our breath plumed in front of us. From the corner of my eye, I saw it. The tall, thin figure from Lily's drawings was standing at the end of the hall. It wasn't a shadow this time. It was solid, a being of pure malice, its form contorting as it unfolded itself from the darkness. We didn't wait to see more. We ran. We abandoned everything, our clothes, our furniture, our memories. We just ran out into the night, piling into the car as the house watched us go. As we sped away, I looked back one last time. In the upstairs window of my bedroom, I saw a tall, gaunt figure, its long spindly arm raised in a slow, deliberate wave, and on the wind, I heard one last whisper, a clear, cold promise that it would be waiting. We never went back. To this day, the house sits empty on that hill, a dark monument to the thing that whispers from within its walls. I still hear them sometimes, in the dead of night, a faint, scratching sound in my mind, reminding me that some doors, once opened, can never be truly closed. Thanks for watching. If this story sent a chill down your spine,
It started subtly, as these things often do. My family and I had just moved into what we thought was our dream home, an old Victorian house with character pouring from every corner. My younger sister Maya was the first to notice it. Tucked away at the end of the upstairs hallway, almost hidden in the shadows, was a door. It was made of dark, heavy wood with no handle, no keyhole, just a flat, unnerving surface. We tried everything to open it, pushing, pulling, even trying to pry it open with a crowbar. It wouldn't budge. Dad joked it was probably just walled off during a renovation, a forgotten relic. But there was something about that door that made my skin crawl. It felt cold to the touch, a deep, unnatural cold that seemed to suck the warmth right out of your hand. Life went on, and for a while we almost forgot about the door. But then the noises started. Late at night, you'd hear it. A faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging slowly down the other side of the wood. At first I thought it was just the old house settling, or maybe a mouse trapped in the walls, but the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Maya heard it too. She'd crawl into my bed, her small body trembling, whispering about the scratching man behind the door. We told our parents, but they brushed it off as overactive imaginations, a byproduct of a new, creaky house. They told us to ignore it. But how do you ignore a sound that feels like it is trying to get inside your head? One night, the scratching was louder than ever. It was frantic, desperate. I couldn't take it anymore. I crept out of my room and down the hallway. The air grew colder with every step, my breath turning to fog. As I got closer, another sound joined the scratching. Soft, wet thud, over and over. It sounded like something heavy and damp being dropped on the floor. I pressed my ear against the cold wood, my heart pounding in my chest. The scratching stopped. Silence. And then a whisper. It was right on the other side, so close I could feel the vibration through the wood. It wasn't a language I recognized, just a series of guttural, raspy hisses that made the hair on my arms stand up. I stumbled back, my mind screaming. Whatever was in there knew I was listening. It was aware of me. From that night on, things escalated. Shadows in the corner of my eye would dart away when I turned to look. Objects would move on their own, a cup sliding across the counter, a book falling from a shelf with no one near it. Maya started having terrible nightmares. She'd wake up screaming about a tall, skinny man with long, spindly fingers and eyes that were just dark, empty holes. She said he would stand at the foot of her bed, just watching her, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. She drew pictures of him. They were chilling. A lanky, distorted figure that looked more like a collection of broken twigs than a person. In every drawing, he was standing in our hallway, pointing a long, bony finger at the door that never opens. My parents finally started to believe us when the smell began. It was a faint, coppery scent at first, like old pennies, but it grew stronger each day, concentrating around the door. Soon, it was a thick, cloying stench of decay and something else, something metallic and sweet. It clung to our clothes, our hair. It was nauseating. One afternoon, while my parents were out, Maya and I were in the living room. Suddenly, we heard a loud bang from upstairs. It sounded like the door had been slammed open. We froze, listening. Then we heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, dragging footsteps, coming from the end of the hall. Drag, scrape, drag, scrape. They were getting closer to the top of the stairs. We hid behind the sofa, too terrified to even breathe. The footsteps stopped right at the landing. We could see a shadow stretching down the staircase, long and distorted in the afternoon light. It was impossibly thin, with arms that hung down almost to the floor. The smell was overwhelming now, a putrid wave that made me want to vomit. Maya was sobbing silently, her face buried in my side. I peeked over the top of the sofa. Standing at the top of the stairs was the thing from Maya's drawings. It was tall, emaciated, its skin a pale, grayish color. Its limbs were too long, bending at odd angles, but its face was the worst. It had no eyes, no nose, just a wide, gaping mouth stretched into a silent scream. Dark, thick liquid, the source of the smell, dripped from its mouth onto the floor. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, its head slowly scanning the room, as if it were sniffing us out. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it turned. With the same slow, dragging gait, it retreated back down the hallway. We heard another loud bang, and then silence. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. The smell faded to a dull throb. We stayed hidden for hours, long after our parents came home. We tried to explain what we saw, but how could we? It sounded insane. They saw how terrified we were, though. That night, Dad nailed a heavy wooden cross to the unopenable door. He said it was just to make us feel better. 8. But I saw the look in his eyes. He was scared too. For a week, things were quiet. Scratching stopped, the nightmares ceased, the smell was gone. We started to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe it was over. That hope was shattered one evening. We were all downstairs watching TV when we heard it. A splintering crash from upstairs. We rushed up to find the cross Dad had nailed to the door lying on the floor, snapped in half. The wood of the door itself was covered in deep, gouge-like scratches, far too deep to be made by fingernails. They looked like they'd been carved with claws. As we stared in horror, a dark, viscous liquid began to seep from beneath the door. It pooled on the floorboards, thick and black like tar, and the awful sweet. Metallic smell filled the air again, stronger than ever before. We didn't even pack. We grabbed what we could and ran. We left that house and never, ever looked back. I still have nightmares about that door. Sometimes I dream that it finally opens. I'm standing in the hallway, and the door creaks open just a crack. I can't see what's inside, just an endless, suffocating darkness. But I can hear it. I can hear the scratching. I can hear a voice. The same raspy whisper, calling my name from the blackness, inviting me in. We never found out what was behind that door. The real estate agent told us the next family who moved in broke their lease after only a month. They wouldn't say why, they just left, same as we did. I know it's still there. The door, and whatever is trapped behind it. Waiting, scratching, waiting for someone to finally let it out. The city was a concrete beast, and finding an affordable apartment felt like winning the lottery. So when I found a place downtown, small but within my budget, I jumped on it. It had its quirks, sure. The floorboards creaked a symphony with every step, and the pipes groaned like a dying man. But it had character. It had a window. A big, beautiful bay window in the living room that the landlord had glossed over during the tour. I didn't think much of it then. I was just happy to have a place to call my own. The first few days were a blur of unpacking boxes and ordering takeout. I was exhausted but content. It wasn't until the third night that I really noticed the window. I'd finished setting up my couch and plopped down, ready to binge watch some shows. That's when I realized I hadn't opened the curtains since I moved in. They were thick, heavy velvet, a deep burgundy color that swallowed the light. Curious, I pulled them back, and I froze. There was no city skyline, no neighboring buildings, no street lights casting a warm orange glow. There was just a room, another room, looked almost identical to my own living room, a perfect mirror image. Same beige walls, same scuffed wooden floors. The only difference was that it was completely empty. No boxes, no furniture, nothing. It was sterile, silent, and deeply unsettling. I pressed my face against the glass. It was cold, solid. I knocked on it, a hollow thud, echoing back. This made no sense. My apartment was on the 7th floor. What could possibly be on the other side? I rushed to the building's exterior, craning my neck to look up at my unit. From the outside, there was no window, just a flat, featureless brick wall where my living room should be. My blood ran cold. Back inside, I stared at the impossible view. My reflection stared back, but behind it, the empty room remained. A chill slithered down my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Trick of the light, some weird architectural feature. A prank by the previous tenant. But no explanation felt right. I decided to close the curtains and forget about it. Some things are better left unknown, but I couldn't forget. The window called to me. The next morning, I found myself pulling the curtains open again. The empty room was still there, unchanged. I spent the whole day stealing glances at it, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Lay in bed, listening to the city's hum, but my mind was fixed on that silent, vacant space just a few feet away. Around 3 a.m., a sound jolted me from my half-sleep. A faint scratching was coming from the living room. My heart hammered against my ribs. Slowly, I crept out of bed and peeked around the corner. The scratching was coming from the window, and the room on the other side was no longer empty. In the center of the mirrored room stood a figure. It was tall and painfully thin, its limbs elongated and twisted at unnatural angles. Its skin was the color of ash, stretched tight over a skeletal frame. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, blank surface where features should have been. And it was scratching at its side of the glass, long, spindly fingers leaving faint white lines on the pane. It was trying to get my attention. I slammed my bedroom door shut, my breath catching in my throat. This couldn't be real. I was having a nightmare, a stress-induced hallucination from the move. I pinched myself hard. The pain was sharp, real, which was happening. I stayed huddled in my room until the sun came up, listening to the relentless rhythmic scratching. When dawn broke, the scratching stopped. With trembling hands, I opened my door. Silence. The apartment felt normal again. I forced myself to walk into the living room. I had to know. I pulled back the curtains. The room was empty again. The figure was gone. But on the other side of the glass, where it had been scratching, were deep, jagged gouges in the floor. My floor. It had been scratching my floor from the other side. I knew I had to leave. This wasn't a quirk. It was a curse. I started packing frantically, throwing my belongings back into boxes. I didn't care about the security deposit. I just needed to get out. As I worked, I could feel it, a heavy, oppressive presence. The feeling of being watched. I didn't dare look at the window. I kept the curtains drawn tight, but my curiosity, my stupid, fatal curiosity, got the better of me. Just before I was about to leave, I thought, one last look. I had to see. I pulled the curtains aside. The figure was back. But it wasn't in the center of the room anymore. It was right up against the glass. Its blank face pressed against the pane, mere inches from mine. And its head was cocked to the side, as if listening. Then, for the first time, it moved with purpose. It raised a hand and placed it flat against the glass. On my side, a handprint began to form in the condensation, a perfect match. I stumbled back, a scream tearing from my throat. The room on the other side started to change. The walls began to decay, peeling and blistering like old paint. The floor warped. The sterile, empty room was rotting before my eyes, and the figure, it began to smile. A wide, lipless gash split across its smooth face, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of hunger, of triumph. The glass began to vibrate, a low hum filling the air, growing louder and louder. Cracks spiderwebbed across the pane, originating from its handprint. It was coming through. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my keys and bolted. I didn't look back. I ran down 7 flights of stairs and burst out onto the street, gasping for air. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. Never went back. I left everything behind. I still have nightmares about that window, about that empty mirrored room. Sometimes, when I look into a mirror or a dark window at night, I see it. The tall, thin figure with the blank face and the predator's smile. I know it's still there, in that apartment waiting. It showed me a reflection of my room, but empty. I think that's what it wants, for my world to be as empty as its own. And I know it's looking for a new window. So if you ever move into a new place and you find a window that doesn't look outside, don't open the curtains, just leave, and never look back. The old house on Hemlock Lane was a steal, a relic of forgotten architecture that my wife, Sarah, and I had fallen in love with. It had character, she'd said. Good bones, but some bones are better left buried. Our son Leo was the first to feel it. He'd stand at the top of the basement stairs, his small hand hovering over the doorknob, refusing to go down. He said it felt full. I'd laughed it off, ruffling his hair. It was just a dusty old basement, I told him. But late at night, when the house settled into a chorus of groans and sighs, I started to understand. A low, rhythmic sound would pulse up through the floorboards, faint but undeniable. It sounded like a slow, deep breath. The basement door, a heavy oak thing, would be ajar in the mornings, no matter how firmly I shut it the night before. Sarah complained of a damp, musty smell that clung to the ground floor, a scent like wet earth and decay. I went down to investigate, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive dark. The air was thick, heavy, and cold, and the sound was louder here, slow, wet inhale, and a long, rattling exhale. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the damp stone that wept a black, viscous fluid. The floor felt soft under my feet, almost spongy, like flesh. Leo's imaginary friend wasn't a friend at all. Called it the breather. Talked to it through the floor vents, his whispers lost in the rhythmic pulse from below. Sarah was becoming a ghost in our new home, her eyes dark-ringed, her skin pale. She told me she heard scratching from beneath the floorboards at night, a frantic, desperate sound. I tried to stay rational, blaming the old plumbing, the house settling. But I couldn't explain the way the mold spread from the basement door. Its tendrils like black veins creeping up the walls, pulsing faintly in time with the breathing. The breaking point came during a storm. The power went out, plunging us into darkness. The breathing from the basement was louder than ever, a hungry guttural sound that vibrated through the entire house. Leo began to scream, pointing at the basement door. It was wide open. A thick, dark fog, smelling of grave dirt and rot, was pouring out, coiling and twisting like a living thing. Sarah grabbed Leo, her face a mask of terror. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find. A fireplace poker stood between my family and the encroaching darkness. The fog coalesced, taking on a vague, shifting shape in the gloom. It was the house. The basement wasn't just a part of it. It was its lungs. The entire structure was a living, breathing entity, and we were parasites it was trying to expel. The breathing became a roar, the walls groaning as if in exertion. We fled into the storm, not daring to look back at the house that watched us with its dark, empty windows. We never went back. We left everything behind. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I think I can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic pulse on the edge of hearing. A slow, deep breath, waiting. The tires screeched as we tore away from that cursed house, the silhouette shrinking in the rearview mirror. We didn't stop until we hit a grimy little motel 3 towns over. The kids were asleep in the back, exhausted from the terror. My wife Sarah just stared out the window, her face a pale mask. I thought, finally, we're safe. I was wrong. The flickering neon sign of the Sleepy Hollow Inn was the first warning. Then came the whispers, seeping through the thin walls of our room, faint at first, then clearer. The same cold spots appeared, chilling us to the bone. In the middle of the night, my daughter woke up screaming. She said the man with the crooked smile was standing at the foot of her bed, just watching. The entity hadn't just been in the house, it had attached itself to us. There was no running. I had to face it. I spent days in the local library's archives, my fingers coated in the dust of forgotten history, and that's when I found him. Dr. Alistair Finch, the original owner of our home. He wasn't just a doctor, he was a disgraced physician obsessed with the afterlife. In the early 1900s, he conducted horrific experiments in the basement, trying to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. He believed fear was the key, the frequency that opened the door. The newspaper clippings described him as a monster who preyed on the vulnerable, his family being his first victims. He didn't just haunt the house, it woven his evil into its very foundation, creating a permanent gateway. And then I found the last article, a small faded clipping from 1928. Dr. Finch was never found. Simply vanished inside his own home. But there was a chilling final note, a quote from his journal. I will not cross over alone. Those who share my space will share my fate, tethered to me in this endless silent scream. That's when I understood. We hadn't bought a house, we'd bought a tomb. We were his new experiment. The whispers are louder now, even in the daylight. The crooked smile greets me in every reflection. We can't sell the house, we can't leave. We are the new ghosts of Ashworth Manor, bound to him forever. There's no escape. There never was. Thanks for watching. The nights blurred into a continuous waking nightmare. We weren't sleeping anymore. Not really. Instead, we'd find ourselves standing in dark corners of the motel room, staring at nothing, our bodies heavy and cold. My wife Sarah developed a tremor in her hands that never seemed to stop. Our son Leo stopped speaking entirely. He would just hum a low, discordant tuna melody that felt chillingly familiar, like a distorted version of the whispers from the house. The entity wasn't just in the house anymore. It had latched onto us, a parasite feeding on our sanity. Desperate, I found a man named Alistair, a supposed paranormal expert with decades of experience. He met us at a quiet cafe, his eyes full of a confidence that gave me a sliver of hope. He listened patiently as I recounted everything's the shadows, the voices, the feeling of being watched and copied. He brought out an old silver locket, explaining it was a containment vessel. The plan was simple. He would perform a ritual to draw the entity into the locket, severing its connection to us. We met him back at the house that evening. The air was thick and suffocating. As Alistair began chanting in a language I didn't recognize, the house fought back. The temperature plummeted. The shadows on the walls began to writhe and stretch, coalescing into a grotesque parody of our family. Their limbs too long, their smiles too wide. The locket on the floor began to glow with a sickly green light before it suddenly shattered into 1,000 pieces. Alistair screamed, a sound that was cut short as a shadowy tendril shot from the wall and pulled him into the darkness. The car wouldn't start. Our phones were dead. Force, gentle yet absolute, guided us back inside. The front door swung open on its own, a silent invitation. This time there was no fear, only a strange sense of resignation, of coming home. As we stepped over the threshold, the whispers greeted us, not as a threat, but as a welcome. We could feel ourselves changing, our thoughts unraveling and weaving into the house's consciousness. We were becoming part of the chorus, our story just another layer in the eternal echo of the walls. Soon, a new family would arrive, drawn by the silence, and they would hear our whispers, our warnings, our welcome. And the cycle would begin again. The last scream echoed and then faded, not into silence, but into the very bones of the house. We were pulled back, not through the door, but through the walls, the floor, the very air itself. It was like drowning, but instead of water, we were submerged in memory, in sorrow, in the endless hunger of the house. Our own memories began to fray, our faces blurring in our minds. My wife's name, my children's laughter, it all became whispers, distant echoes lost in the chorus of countless others who had come before. We weren't a family anymore. We were just notes in an ancient, terrible song. The house had digested us, and we were now part of its eternal gut. Decades melted away like wax. The seasons turned outside the grimy windows, but inside, it was always the same suffocating twilight. We watched the world change, a silent, unseen audience. Then, one sunny afternoon, the front door creaked open again. The sound was like a jolt, a command. A new family, father, a mother, 2 bright-eyed children, a boy and a girl. Their laughter, so full of life, was a profane sound in this hallowed hall of despair. They spoke of fresh starts and new beginnings, their words painting vibrant futures on the dusty air. They couldn't see us, of course, not yet. As the father carried his daughter over the threshold, her gaze drifted up the grand staircase. For a fleeting moment, her smile faltered. She was looking right at me. I felt a cold surge, a flicker of something that wasn't mine. It was the house stirring within me, the house telling me what to do. My own daughter's face flashed in my mind, but the image was already fading, replaced by a chilling purpose. The little girl shivered, and her father asked if she was cold. She shook her head but kept staring, her eyes wide with a fear she didn't understand. That night, the whispers began. We moved through the halls, no longer as prisoners, but as guards. We were the chill on the back of their necks, the fleeting shadow in the corner of their eye, the soft weeping that came from an empty room. I found myself standing over the little boy's bed, my form a cold spot in the warm air. The urge to reach out, to whisper his name, was overwhelming. It wasn't my will, but the house's. The cycle had begun anew, and we were now the instruments of its torment. The house always finds new voices for its song, and it always, always wins.